Welcome to SF Commercial Property Conversations with Bruce Bean, where Bay Area investments meet expert insights. Get ready to unlock the strategies of commercial real estate success.
So today we once again have Sam Louwrens with us, and today we're going to talk about the famous Millennium Tower in downtown San Francisco, the tilting tower as it might be called. And why did that happen, and what is insurance all about in regards to that particular construction? So Sam, you wrote an article about this, so give us a little clue of what you found out.
Yeah, 301 Mission Street. That's the address for the Leaning Tower of San Francisco, as many will call it. And that comparison to the Leaning Tower of Pisa is not, it's not unwarranted. There's a lot of similarities between the Leaning Tower of Pisa and 301 Mission Street, the Millennium Tower. First, the soil composition. San Francisco has this clay layer underneath they call it the San Francisco fill, that rubble that they put there so that people could actually build things. That clay is known as Old Bay clay. It's Ice Age era clay that's very soft. Some people would refer to it as liquid soil. And so when people build in San Francisco, you have to get really creative with the foundations. You've got to have these deep piles, usually piles that extend to bedrock, except not in this case. We'll get to that.
Usually.
Exactly. Anyways, that's where this building in particular really faced challenges, was with that clay soil. And the same thing happened with Pisa. It was built on a layer of clay, and the engineers didn't know that. Of course, back then they had more excuses, right? They didn't have boreholes. They couldn't take deep soil samples. They really couldn't have known that was going to happen. And we have all this data today. When they were building the Leaning Tower of Pisa, they were really relying off of, okay, well, have we built something this big before? This tall vertical structure? Yes. Did it fall over? No. So when Pisa began to sink into the clay, they paused construction, which maybe should have happened at the Millennium Tower, because that project also began sinking before it was even completed.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes. Yeah. So they started building the Millennium Tower in 2005, and I think in around 2010 to 2013, it was finished. And by then, it had already sunk past its estimated lifetime settlement, which was 6 inches. You always expect every building to settle over its life, but with the Millennium Tower, I think by 2016 it had tripled. We were around 18 inches of settlement by 2016, and it was beginning to tilt to one side. So the same thing kind of happened with Pisa. But where the similarities become to the point of, that everyone always says history repeats itself, kind of hilarious, is Pisa in the 90s started to tilt far more after they did a little bit of a remediation attempt. Pisa was leaning. It's always been kind of falling. So they started trying to implement this fix, and it made the problem worse. And then they had to get creative, and now they've stabilized Pisa, and Pisa remains a building that is continuously monitored indefinitely, just in case things start to escalate again. Exact same thing with the Millennium Tower. There was a retrofit. They tried to fix the problem, and now not only is it still settling, albeit much smaller increments, but it's being continuously monitored, potentially indefinitely. We'll see.
Well, so did they actually make a correction? Did they get it to tilt back straight? No.
So, well, this is where there are multiple stories and multiple perspectives, and there's all this money that's flying around because the HOA wants to say that the building is completely structurally sound, it's safe, it's not settling. Their own data does show that it is settling, but at a very reduced rate. So they've done a good job by this point at keeping the building from structurally failing. and they've addressed that. It's called a divergent condition. So when a building starts to fall to one side, that center of gravity shifts, and now it's disproportionately exerting load on the soil. So it's called a divergent condition. It's going to sort of dynamically trend and continue to fall more and more as time goes on. So what ended up happening with the Millennium Tower was there was a lawsuit. Everyone was pointing fingers, from the developers to the homeowners association to the engineers to the contractors to even the city itself, and they ultimately decided to implement a $100 million fix, which was, all right, we're going to drill piles on one side of the building all the way down to bedrock. So this was a perimeter fix. They settled on 52 piles, and the idea was this would correct the lean and stop the sink. And it did correct the leaning problem. So I think the building is no longer tilting. I don't think it's been straightened out. If you look at the data they're releasing, you can see there is still some lean. And if you look at satellite data, there's this company called Value Space that releases satellite-based data to insurance companies. It'll show microscopic movements in megastructures like dams and buildings, mines, etc.
Oh, wow.
If you look at those, you'll see it is still tilting, but not really at a concerning level. So the concern with the Millennium Tower isn't that it's going to continue sinking and falling over. The reason why it's still relevant is because there is some question as to whether it would be okay in an earthquake event, which is a possibility in San Francisco, almost a near certainty, actually.
Yeah, we just had some.
Exactly, right. And so whether it could survive a larger earthquake, and survive not in the sense that it would fall down, but whether it would cross that point of no return to where it just starts quickly, unsalvageably tilting in the event of an earthquake, that's something that's debated by engineers.
Well, so let's go back for a second. Since you're in the insurance world, I assume that the insurance companies, either the construction insurance or the ongoing property insurance, some insurance company probably paid some money, right?
Oh, massive
amounts of money.
But this is where things get a little odd. So what ended up happening was the geotechnical engineers monitored the building at its completion, and they found that it had sunk well past the lifetime settlement. So you would think in 2010 or so, I have the date here. When did it finish construction?
Well, no matter. Anyway.
Yeah, one way or another. When it completed construction, they knew it had sunk more than it should have. And instead of immediately trying to forecast, could this continue to be an issue? Why is this an issue? Should we come up with a fix for this? Is this a problem? They decided to just note it and move on. And One of the things that's interesting is that firm was underneath, I don't know if it's called Discovery, but they were about to be acquired by a much larger engineering firm.
Oh, wow.
So one of the things I don't know, but I'd love to know, is whether the insurance, whether that became an issue because during the acquisition, because were they trying to not disclose this potentially massive claim for getting acquired by a larger engineering firm? Is that why they didn't set out to properly disclose what was happening with 301 Mission Street? I don't know. I'm not alleging that that's the case. I'd love to speak to someone who was involved with the insurance or at either organization, who could speak more to that topic.
Well, yeah, we'll probably never know the answer to that. That may be locked into some settlement agreement or who knows where.
But exactly. It's probably a significant source of pain. I mean, the circumstances are there. It's that Charles Munger quote, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. So yeah.
Yeah. And this one has a very distressing outcome. So anyway, that's okay. So the insurance companies did pay some massive dollars to try and retrofit and fix this situation. But so
insurance didn't pay for the retrofit, as I understand. Maybe they did. That we can't know, but what ended up happening was there were all these lawsuits flying around. The first people to get sued, ironically, was not the developers and the engineers. The first lawsuit was from the HOA, and they sued the neighboring construction project owned by the city of San Francisco, which is the Transbay Transit Center. And the reason they did that was to avoid, there's this legal loophole where if you sue the city, you can avoid the attorney fees. So those 40% attorney fees, had there been any award, that's now mitigated. All of the settlement can be given to the HOA and the residents. So they sued the city's project, and the justification was that the Transbay Transit Center, when it was built, they had pumped water out of the ground in order to keep the site dry. And when you do that to that type of clay, it condenses it. It causes some degree of subsidence. So the claim is when they built that building, they weakened the soil conditions under the Millennium Tower, which was directly adjacent. And then that caused the Millennium Tower to have all these problems. The reason that doesn't make any sense, to me at least, when I'm reading about how this went down, is because the Transbay Transit Center only broke ground right when the Millennium Tower finished construction, really. So after it already sunk well past its lifetime settlement, and the Millennium Tower, when they were building the foundations in the 5-story subterranean parking garage, they had pumped water out of the ground as well. So they would have contributed to their own settlement when doing that. So one way or another, the city got blamed. And what that means is that when there was an award and the lawsuit was settled, the taxpayer was ultimately also on the hook, not just the developers. The city would subrogate against the developers. So it's not like they were totally absolved or anything. They were roped right into it immediately after.
So let's jump to some construction going on now that you might be insuring. How can people avoid this whole situation?
Yeah, so I'd say the first thing is relying on data and peer review. So when it comes to the Millennium Tower, there was another project that the same engineering firm had been involved with that was similar. So the Millennium Tower is a unique building. It's a concrete structure. It's 600 million pounds or so. And a structure like that should have foundations going down to bedrock. It just should. It's incredibly heavy, much heavier than steel buildings of the same height. So another project had been proposed, and when it was submitted to peer review, it ultimately got canned because they found there would be problems with this. It's too risky. The Millennium Tower wasn't subjected to peer review. I don't know how they avoided that. The same engineers got their dream. They used this short friction pile system. So you have two types of piles. You got piles that can go down to bedrock and actually, cement, firmly plant that building on that bedrock layer. And then you got friction piles. And the way friction piles work is they create resistance with the surrounding soil, surrounding clay. And these friction piles were totally insufficient for a building of the Millennium Tower's size. I mean, if you look at a cross diagram of buildings next to the Millennium Tower, if you look at like a 2D diagram and all of their foundation systems, there are other buildings that are far smaller and likely made not out of concrete. And you'll see the piles go much deeper if they're friction pile systems. And if they're systems that go down to bedrock, also smaller buildings. And so the Millennium Tower kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. It's got this, visually, before even getting into the math range, just visually incompetent looking structure. So I'd say, those if you're a developer, you've got to vet, you've got to sort of, you've got to vet what your engineer's bringing to the table, right? You can't over rely on them because the engineer proposed multiple foundation systems. And what do you think the developer did?
Oh, the cheapest one.
Yeah. And that cheapest one, when it doesn't work, it's a massive problem.
So explain to the listeners peer review, just so we understand clearly what that is.
Yeah, bringing in an outside perspective, whether it's a government authority submitting to that kind of process, or you can hire consultants to kind of review what you're looking at. There are engineers who have done the math. There's this great YouTube channel called Building Integrity, and you can watch him break down mathematically how from the get-go this pile system wouldn't have supported the building's weight for that soil. He'll lay it out. It's provable. You can see it. And part of the reason for that is because those initial piles, there were 950 of them, I believe, right around there. And they were too densely packed. And so when you have those piles too close to each other, they can't exert that resistance on the soil as effectively. And on top of that, when you have that many piles, they turn into a heavy load themselves. So you're just adding to the existing problem with the structure that's already there.
Oh, God. Wow. All right. So those of you that are listening and building big buildings, come to Sam to make sure you get the right review and the right insurance. Otherwise, you could be leaning very close to bankruptcy because of having to rebuild a particularly bad construction. So just out of curiosity, Sam, did you happen to look at the building that fell down in Florida?
I did not. Was that an apartment building?
Yeah, that was a condo building that you may remember in the news. That basically, the back half of the building kind of fell down, and it was a terrible tragedy. But a sort of a similar situation where the construction was insufficient, and it was an older building, but in a much shorter building, but still kind of the same scenario.
Right, and I want to emphasize it's not really it's hard. You can't really blame the contractors, because the contractors will take the designs they're given and they'll execute on them, and they'll rely on that information being correct. So with the Millennium Tower, they were told, this is really funny. There was a retrofit. I don't think we've talked about the retrofit.
This is after the fact, right?
So after it was sinking, what ended up coming out of the lawsuit was, all right, to fix everything and make everyone whole, we are going to the developer, in conjunction with the taxpayer, is going to pay for a $100 million seismic retrofit of the Millennium Tower. We're going to remediate the leaning problem, and we're going to take these piles all the way down to bedrock. It was supposed to be $100 million. That's important. And so the idea was, we've got these 52 new piles. We're going to drill them down to bedrock, fix the building, move on, call it a day.
That's only on one side of the building, right?
Yes, which is fine. You don't want to over-engineer a solution.
Okay, all right.
So as of today, that 52 pile solution, which they started work on, once they started work, the Millennium Tower immediately began sinking much faster than before. It actually experienced the worst differential settlement in its lifetime after they started the remediation. And a lot of engineers had warned them that this would happen. There's a famous letter by engineers Karp and Carden that you can read publicly, where they talk about, hey, listen, you have this proposed fix. Here's why it's going to make the problem worse. And they were right. One of the issues with the proposed fix was that the lead engineer, this is so funny, the principal engineer for the retrofit, his name, I kid you not, it's Ronald Hamburger.
Good old McDonald's hamburger. Okay,
yes. Ronald Hamburger. So Ronald Hamburger had chosen a design for these 52 piles. And if you look into his justification, why he needs 52 piles, the only reason he decided that 52 would be sufficient was because they could be spaced 6 feet apart, giving the contractor enough room to work with, and they looked good on the diagram.
Okay. It's the only reason.
Yes. It turns out they only ever needed 18 piles to get the job done. The reason that's important is because when you're drilling that many piles, 52 around the building, what do you have to do in order to build that process? You got to pump water out of the soil. So they were making the settlement worse by trying to fix the problem. And well into the retrofit, there's this quote. I love this quote from Ronald Hamburger during a government audit meeting. You can watch this live hearing. He says, there's 1.5 years into the proposed fix when things are all going wrong. He says, this is the first time we have ever attempted or tried to optimize the design. A year and a half into a $100 million project, they attempt to optimize it.
Oh yeah, okay. Little late.
And so by that point, because of the increased problems, the project was hit with significant cost overruns, and it turned from $100 million fix into $150 million fix.
Oh my God. Oh
and that extra cost, you know who paid for it?
Oh no.
Yeah, there was the developers in conjunction with the homeowners, the residents.
Oh, wow.
Sorry.
Oh,
so
wow.
The residents footed, I think, something like $6.8 million worth of that bill,
wow.
Which is just ridiculous.
Wow. All right. So if you're interested in construction and insurance, I think you better call Sam, because he is very interested in this process and can lead you through it in a way that hopefully will not get you into trouble in the future.
I love understanding risk. I like thinking like an underwriter. At the end of the day, my job is easier than theirs or yours, right? It's to find where the potential failure points are, what the big risks are in your operation, and then get you terms. And I like to give people very exhaustive marketing summaries so that they can make of their own volition decisions about what they want their program to look like. Do we want these kinds of coverages? Do we want to self-insure for this kind of potential risk through an exclusion form? Do we want to willfully take a certain type of exclusion and bear that risk, or do we want to go with a more expensive option? And so people just need to understand, you can, just like you can over-engineer a project, you can also over-insure your organization. Insurance companies and other brokers probably would seethe at hearing that, but just on its face, it's true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you don't make as much commission if you lower the insurance rate. So
right.
The insurance broker is not incentivized to try and really optimize your insurance the best way possible. So
no, there's definitely a bad incentive in that sense. Yeah.
Well, this has been very fun. We are going to continue this discussion down the road, and I think we're going to loop in Michael Koch into this conversation at a later date and talk about property and casualty insurance in this vein. So that'll be fun.
That would be a blast. I look forward to it.
All right. Well, we will talk soon, and good to see you.
That's a wrap on today's journey through the SF commercial real estate scene. Ready to share your story? Visit sfcommercialconversations.com/guest. Your insights could lead the next conversation.